So in today's video, we're going to look at proving the product rule of differentiation from first principles. So first, we're going to let the product of f of x and g of x be a new function h of x. And now we know that the derivative of h of x is the limit as delta x approaches 0 of h of x plus delta x minus h of x over h. Now we can re-plug in this here to see what this would be in terms of f and g. So we get the limit as delta x approaches 0 of f of x plus delta x, g of x plus delta x, minus f of x, g of x. And this, this should have been a delta x, and this is all over delta x. Now what we can do here is say that this is the same as the limit as delta x approaches 0 of f of x plus delta x, g of x plus delta x, and now we're going to subtract f of x times g of x plus delta x, and then we're going to add f of x times g of x plus delta x, and then we're going to subtract f of x, g of x, and this whole thing is over delta x. Okay, so now what we can do is we see that this term and this term have a g of x plus delta x in common. So this becomes the limit as delta x approaches 0 of g of x plus h multiplied by, now we're going to take this delta x and put it as our denominator. So we get this expression here. And now in these two terms, we're going to factor out an f of x. And that gives us g of x plus delta x minus g of x over h inside that bracket. Now what we notice here is that this is just the definition of the derivative of f of x from first principles, and this is the derivative of g of x from first principles. So what we can say is that this is the same as the limit as delta x approaches 0 of g of x plus h f prime of x plus f of x g prime of x. And finally, we know that, this should have been a delta x, and this should have been a delta x. Now, we know that as delta x approaches 0, g of x is just, g of x plus delta x is just going to approach g of x. And so this becomes g of x f prime of x plus f of x g prime of x. And so we've proved the product rule. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or video suggestions, leave them in the comments below, and if you want to see more content like this, subscribe now.